Welcome into the Odds and Audibles podcast. I'm at Prehm, Erik, Skopil, live in living color from Indianapolis, Indiana, covering Big Ten Media Days. I should say Erik is. I'm not. I'm in Eugene, Oregon. It feels weird, Erik. Set the mood. You're out there a couple days early, hanging out. What's just Big Ten Media Days like? First time around, because the Pac-12, it's a one-day shot, one day in, one day out. It's a different deal here.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the bigger things. Well, yeah, there's a couple things, but they do 3 days here. They care about their football. They gave each team their due, so there are 3 days. There are 6 teams per day. Oregon is on the final day, which will be Thursday. We're recording this about 6 o'clock local time, Eastern Standard, out here in Indianapolis, after a day that was rather uneventful, if I'm honest, just in terms of Oregon-related content. We can get into some of the stuff that was talked about otherwise. Maybe a certain head coach kind of had stage fright up there on the press conference. I felt bad for Deshaun Foster. It was the very first thing I saw today. For those who haven't seen it, go check it out. It was the very first thing I saw at Big Ten Media Day. I was kind of like, oh, this is awkward. Hopefully it gets better, and I think it did. But
it did.
Yeah, no, it's at Lucas Oil Stadium. It's in a massive football stadium. You know, there's a bigger vibe out here, I would say. There's a ton of national media folks out here. There's a ton of regional media folks, obviously, a lot of folks from our network 24/7. So today was more like just kind of getting a feel for it. I thought we'd jump on, kind of talk about that, and then maybe preview a little bit of what will come on Thursday, which is when Oregon goes, and there will be a lot more content, a lot more to talk about after that day. But I guess the biggest one, and it's the most obvious one, it takes a lot more effort to get out here. Tuesday, I was driving from Eugene up to Portland, flight from Portland to Denver, from Denver to Indianapolis, got in at like midnight local time. This is the new world in the Big Ten, right? Like it's going to take more time for all of us to get to these games, whether you're a fan, media, if you're a player, a coach. That part felt pretty real to me. I know it felt real to Bill Oram from the Oregonian. We were talking, he got in at 3:30 a.m. this morning, was up at 8:30 a.m., made it over to Media Day. Just a little bit of different circumstances. As you said, 3 days, a little bit more time with each team, but certainly more time to get out here too.
Yeah, the travel is going to be something to get used to. The overall venue, though, is entirely different. Remember, the Pac-12, if very few people know or get to go to these things because they're not open to the public. But the Pac-12 historically has done it in LA, and then they moved to Vegas. And at both spots, one of them was at the Pac-12 offices. The other one, a couple times they've done it where it's at some kind of like amphitheater, or not amphitheater, but some kind of like music hall type session in LA. And then the last one was done in straight up like a nightclub. I don't know if you remember that or not.
Oh, I do.
A nightclub in Las Vegas. Lots of glitz and glamour. This one, it's like you said, it's in Lucas Oil Stadium where the Indianapolis Colts call home. Is it more like substance and less flash? Because the Pac-12 tried to have a lot of flash and unfortunately very little substance. Is that maybe a way to describe it?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how much is actually different. I'll say this: all the coaches and players are in suits. A lot of the media members are in suits. I was in a 24/7 pull up or zip up, I should say. There was maybe a little more class to it, I guess. I think, and maybe this is boring for listeners, so I apologize. I do think it speaks to sort of like some of the regional kind of culture a little bit of like, this is, to your point, it kind of feels a little more all about business. Like, we're out here, this is a football venue, this is all about football. Not that there's not a lot of fun being had too, but it feels very football centric. And I think at times in the Pac-12, it kind of felt about, like you said, about other things, maybe about kind of like impressing with the presentation. We're in kind of like these kind of fun, vibrant locations. The food was much better at the Pac-12 Media Day, at least in my opinion, from day one. We'll see. Maybe Big Ten will step up tomorrow. Maybe that's Big Ten kind of regionality from a food perspective. So these are just some of the thoughts I've had. And again, listeners might find this to be really boring. I think it's kind of interesting to talk about just because Oregon is in a new conference. This sort of signals like this is the first time Oregon's been like in a real Big Ten venue as a part of the conference. There's questions about Oregon being asked. Oregon will go tomorrow. UCLA and USC went today. Washington will also go tomorrow. Like, these schools are now really, this is kind of the official start of being in this conference. And so I figured we'd jump on and kind of talk about the differences and how it feels. And obviously, Matt, you'll join us when we go out to some of these road venues, but there does feel like a little bit more of a football forward element to this. And I'll also say, like, and maybe this is kind of unfair because for a couple of reasons, but it does feel like this is a little bit better attended. And again, there's only 6 schools on display today, but it sounds like the general feel is if you come out to this, you come for all 3 days, even if your school's not going. And so, like, there's folks who had their team go on Tuesday who are still around for Wednesday and Thursday out here. Like, that's kind of the feel. And that didn't necessarily feel like it in the Pac-12. I think a lot of the people who are out here are real football, like big football fans. They're all about the sport. And it's cool to be around those people and talking about those people, because I think those people cover their programs really well.
Yeah. And this is where the move to this conference, this is one of the driving factors of the national respect, the national attention, the commitment to the coverage of these schools and these sports. It's not the same where it's in the Big Ten compared to what it was like in the Pac-12. I mean, Erik and I think, have attended basketball media days before, and definitively, like, some national outlets just didn't send anybody to Pac-12 media days for basketball. And if I'm trying to rack my brain here really quickly, but like, I even think even last year there were some national outlets that didn't send someone to the football side of things, or maybe they sent a lower tier national reporter, not their big guns, to these events, or they only sent one instead of every other place getting 2 or 3 people. I imagine, you just kind of brought it up, I'm not there, but you can tell me if I'm correct, but I imagine CBS, ESPN, The Athletic, Fox Sports, all these big media companies probably have multiple people out there. CBS in particular, I know, like, our Cover 3 team is there. I think Josh Pate is there. Like, our national team is there. Like, 24/7's team is there, and then we're there. So, like, theoretically, like, CBS alone could have, I'm estimating, like 10 to 15 people who could be talking to Oregon people at media day, which is never the case ever at one Pac-12 media day.
I think we have, I think between CBS and 24/7, there's like 30 of us here. Yeah. Like today on the field, they had 2 different CBS Sports like on-field studio shows being filmed at a time. Like, one with their CBS Sports like TV talent, and then on the other side, you mentioned the Cover 3 guys were all here. Josh Pate was here. They have Big Ten Network had their own setup too. We'll get into the kind of what we'll get out of this ourselves here, but like, tomorrow I'll have one-on-one interviews with some of the players that are like in like a special TV room with like, this is for me kind of new age, like in a TV studio setup with camera lights and, actual microphones, not just us sitting in our living rooms or in our hotel rooms doing this. So like, this is like definitely a step up in terms of the effort and resources put into this thing. And I think the quality of it will be better too. And I'm hoping those listening will check out some of the content we're able to put out. We're hopefully to do we will do another podcast tomorrow afternoon, kind of recapping all the Oregon stuff. But like I said, there should be one-on-one interviews with Oregon coaches and players, and all that stuff will be online available, I think, by at least Friday at the very latest. So it's not even that access is different. I just think the access is going to be more substantial and higher quality. So yeah, I mean, it's you walk around here and it's the who's who's. All the big guns are out here. Bruce Feldman, Brett McMurphy. I'm going to blank on some of the names, but I've seen so many different people. And one thing that we should bring up here before we kind of talk and maybe wrap it up here and talk about a couple of things is like Jeff Schwartz is here. Yogi Roth is here. Ashley Adamson's here. These are former network people who have landed roles in Big Ten. So it's good to see some of those familiar faces. There was kind of some, I think, for a time, maybe some concern about what their futures would hold. And I'm thrilled, especially with like Yogi and Ashley. I thought were such great on-air talent. It's cool that they've been brought on as well out here, and to have a West Coast feel, at least on their shows, will be great. So yeah, it's the real deal. This is definitely a step up. And I hope, and I think that the kind of result of all this and why it's worth bringing up is, I think Oregon is coming into this conference as a national brand, and I think there's a real chance that it expands it, not just because I think they're going to be better and better on the field, but I think the access and the coverage is going to be significantly better than it ever had been in the Pac-12. And it feels like we're taking a bunch of slights at the old conference. I think they did their best. Yeah. I don't think it was as well run. I don't think they had the resources, certainly, to do all the stuff they're doing out here in Indianapolis. So yeah, I think this is going to do wonders for Oregon, and just being out here kind of, to me, validates sort of those thoughts. And Matt and I both talked about being kind of disappointed that, hey, it's kind of stupid that the Pac-12 is not going to be around, and these teams and all that. There's a trade-off, because Oregon, I think, is going to be treated much better and probably more like what it should be in terms of a national brand.
All right. Let's set the stage briefly for tomorrow, or if you're listening to this today, or listening this on Thursday, what happens from an Oregon perspective on the final media day? Because we'll preface this, like, we're going to record a recap. Erik's going to be there live. He's going to get a lot of one-on-one stuff. He's going to get a lot of at the podium stuff. I'll be covering it remotely, helping him, and we'll kind of regroup at the end of the day and kind of brain dump a little bit of what we learned and takeaways. But from an Oregon perspective, what's the day going to look like tomorrow?
Yeah, so we'll have Dan, who was actually first at the podium at 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. So that's one slight digression here, but the fact that they're doing this kind of like midday East Coast time means that it's not, it kind of equates to reasonable hours for folks out west of like, hey, you're not like you have to wake up at 5 a.m. to watch this. You can get up at 8:30 and watch Dan at the podium. We'll have full video and transcripts and all that up on the website certainly pretty quickly. I'll be speaking with a couple of the players, Terrence Ferguson and Jeffrey Bossa, early afternoon, I think like around 2:00. I should have, and this won't be on the cameras, but I should have one-on-ones with Dan and with Dylan Gabriel, the other Oregon athlete, sometime before that. And then about 4:00, they'll go and do a second podium run. And the first one will be the same setup as, again, the Deshaun Foster thing, where you're out in kind of the big central podium where you'll be peppered with questions. The other one will be kind of a smaller kind of environment on the field, and that'll be kind of a second opportunity. And those interview sessions today were lasting like 40 plus minutes. So Dan will get a lot of questions asked to him there. Same thing with the players. So there will be a lot of opportunities to get to learn more about kind of what the summer's been like from Dan's perspective, and then certainly for three of your leaders on this team: Dylan Gabriel, the quarterback; Terrence Ferguson, obviously the starter tight end; and Jeffrey Bossa, the defensive leader and senior linebacker. So I think it's a good group of guys to have out here. Jeff was in Las Vegas with us last year. He's media savvy. He knows what he's doing. And I know Terrence and Dylan are as well. So it should be a fun day. And we hope to provide some kind of interesting stories and things like that from it. So as Matt said, probably going to be just like a complete brain dump, because there's a lot of information that'll be coming in, probably a couple of hours worth of video. So there's going to be a lot of information. We'll try to get to as much of it and the more pertinent stuff, but certainly check out DuckTerritory, because we're going to have an awful lot of stuff from tomorrow.
Real quick, what are you hoping to learn? Like, what's like your number one question for Dan?
Well, there's a couple team things that are interesting. I'll dive into, like we were talking about earlier today when I think Ross Dellinger of Yahoo posted that they're looking to expand to 105 scholarship players. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like for all these schools. I'll be curious to see what Dan has to say about that. That's certainly something I know he'll be asked about. I'm curious to hear from Dan kind of what the offseason's been like, maybe with each year there's kind of a mantra or a couple of things that they focus on working on. I'm kind of curious to hear what the story of the 2024 season is going to be. And then I guess just the last one is, like how are the Big Ten media people treating Oregon at this thing, right? Like we think Oregon has a great chance to compete for a conference championship. We've seen what they've done from a recruiting perspective. Like, how are the questions slanted and how does Dan deal with it? Like, I expect there's going to be a lot of respect around Oregon, but maybe there'll be some people who aren't believers who have some kind of pointed questions. So I guess I'm just kind of curious to also see kind of what the reaction is to Oregon almost as much as what Dan's reaction is to being in the Big Ten.
He'll be able to answer this because he'll be there, but I'm curious what the room's going to look like with Oregon taking the podium when Dan Lanning takes the podium, because like it or not, in the Big Ten, I'm sure it was still the case. Like previously at Pac-12 media days, some schools would step up to the podium and it would be a full room. And then 2 hours later, another coach would step up and it would be half empty at best. And I'm sure that's been the case for some of these schools at the Big Ten. What kind of, like to your degree, like what kind of reception does Oregon get? What type of, and more so of attention and I guess coverage, maybe that's the correct word. How much they get tomorrow, because they are a big dog, but they are going into a new conference that's got a ton more prestige and history than anything Oregon has. And how are they going to be viewed in that lens? From that perspective is going to be something for me. I imagine it'll be a pretty big room. Dan will probably be a pretty popular guy, and we could see him step up and try and monologue the first 20 or so minutes to kind of limit the amount of questions that he receives in his block of time, like we've seen other coaches do.
Yeah, Dan's pretty cagey, and I'll be curious to see. There are times where he's great in these environments, and there's times where, as you said, he kind of is playing defense more than offense out there, just kind of trying to slow down the questions we can send up there. And I guess just one last thought, because it's come out in the last couple of days. We've talked about in the podcast. Oregon was picked second in the Big Ten preseason polls. Kind of strange the conference itself doesn't do one. I don't know.
We didn't vote in the preseason poll. It was a Cleveland.com newspaper poll that multiple reporters voted on.
Yeah, and then the USA Today had one. So there's these two polls that are kind of out there, but clearly, I mean, this kind of goes to the point of like, how is Oregon going to be received? Clearly, there are people that are buying what Oregon is, because Oregon's ahead of reigning national champion Michigan and kind of right on the heels of Ohio State. Ohio State still had, between the two polls, like 29 out of maybe 40 first place votes. So they're pretty clearly the favorite. But Oregon being number 2 in this poll, I think, is probably kind of expected, but sort of speaks to at least what the vibes are around here. And I've gotten certainly questions from the 24/7 sports reporters from other Big Ten kind of traditional schools they're very much aware that Oregon has a roster to compete and try to do special things in year one. So I'm fired up. Tomorrow's going to be really, really fun. There's a lot of cool stuff going on. And then the schedule doesn't slow down. We'll have Saturday Night Live this weekend, sort of football practice for Oregon next week. Like, there's just, football's here, man. It's coming.
Yeah, media day tomorrow for Oregon. Oregon's fall camp date, they released it. I think maybe fraudulent slip there. Probably too, but they got it out in a press release that they open up the 31st. We've been told of a media day as well. Could be that this coming week. So Erik will have 2 media days in about a week's time. Saturday Night Live in between. Football, like Erik said, is here. Next week, they actually break practice and break the huddle and get out in the field together. We'll have it all, full coverage at DuckTerritory.com. Until the next one, which will be in the next 24 hours or so, we'll brain dump everything we've got from Pac-12 or from Big Ten Media Day. Excuse me. Need to get used to saying that as Oregon embarks on its first season in its new conference. Until then, you've been listening to the Aughts and Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.